Bom dia. Bom dia a todos. Nós estamos aqui abrindo.
Good morning, everyone. This is the opening ceremony for our 11th conference. We're so happy to have you here. We have our opening talk by Mr. Andreas Schleicher, and unfortunately, he will have to leave in half an hour because he has a very important meeting with the OECD. That is why we'll be getting started with him. We'll have a brief talk by Professor Andreas Schleicher. He's a director of education at the OECD. Thank you for being here with us, Professor. After your talk, we'll hear the other speakers and we'll be able to have a fruitful conversation. So good morning to everyone, and we do hope you enjoyed the event. Yesterday, Comparability was really interesting, and today and tomorrow we have our event by the Brazilian Association of Educational Assessment. Once again, thank you all for being here. I will now hand it over to Mr. Andreas Schleicher. Mr. Schleicher, it is an honor to have you here with us. Thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maria-Elena, as always. And thank you for the work that you are doing with Sababa. I think this is the most important moment for assessment, to rethink what we measure and how we measure in a time when we want to educate learners for their future and not just our past. So I just share a few thoughts, and I start with something that you are very familiar with. And this is just, to reflect on the rapid transformation that our economies are going through. When you think about, the time evolution, learning outcomes, even in the OECD countries, not to speak of Brazil, have not changed very much over the years, while technology has fundamentally changed the nature of skills that make people successful. And in the year 2000, when you were reading documents, it was all linear text. You could just process this. We could test those skills very easily. When you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up in an encyclopedia. You trust the answer to the truth. Today, you look up things on Google, and the machine will give you 10,000 answers to your question, and nobody will tell you what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. Literacy is no longer about extracting information, something that you can test very easily. It's about constructing knowledge, validating knowledge, things that we need to reflect in the way in which we teach, and certainly we test. And you can see in 2006, that was the year before the iPhone was invented. We didn't see changes in the learning outcomes. 2009, social media transformed the way we engage with information. 2012, robotics, cloud computing, biogenetics, big data, artificial intelligence, fundamentally changing the nature of knowledge and the way we interact with this. And education, as you can see in the most industrialized nations, hasn't changed very much. I know in Brazil, many people complain about this, that schools are not improving fast enough. But, in much of the industrialized world, is looking a lot worse. And despite of the fact that we are keeping spending more, spending hasn't really changed those dynamics. One of the most disturbing numbers is that you have just 1 in 10 students who can reliably distinguish fact from opinion. And in Brazil, it's less than 1%. In the year 2000, it was 7%, a little bit less, has improved a little bit, but we have changed so much in our world. Fortunately, there are some exceptions. Now, while we were slipping, some regions in China have moved to the top. Why do we know this? Because we have assessment. Otherwise, we would be totally unaware. We would, think, well, that's a different system, a different culture. Now we can put them on the map. Now, Singapore has moved from good to great. Estonia, seeing very significant improvements. In other countries, Portugal, way below the OECD average in the year 2000. Now they're doing as well as, major European economies. Poland has moved from below to the above. At the bottom end, you look at Peru, Albania. There's still a long way to go, but they're seeing rapid improvements. And then, of course, Brazil. It's a little bit up and down, but, Brazil is moving on the right path. Assessment is actually showing that there have been important improvements. To be aware of them, but also to be aware of the long way still to go. And at the same time, also more children have been enrolled, like in Turkey. And then you have countries like Sweden that went the wrong way for a long time, and then suddenly they were able to change things around and saw improvement. So that brings us to what assessment tells us about the world today. It's always important to be aware of that history, to be aware of that knowledge. But the topic for our day is, how do we do that best? And I just want to highlight some of the difficult decisions that we need to make when we work on assessment and evaluation. First of all, in assessment, we focus very much on the outcomes. But what you need for policy is knowledge on how to improve and change those outcomes. We need, I think, in the future of assessment, pay a lot more of attention to the covariates and explain outcomes. Why do disadvantaged students do less well than wealthy students? Why do students in some areas, in some classrooms, do better than others? We need to, if we want to make assessment really valuable for students, for teachers, for schools, we need to change that balance from just looking at the outcomes to looking at what helps to explain the outcomes. And I think in Brazil, that has not got very much attention. Those kinds of covariates are very, very short. But the second question I know you're very familiar with in Brazil is, you want to measure a lot of people, a lot of students, a lot of grades. Well, that costs a lot of money. That takes money away from the quality and the depths of measurement. And what you need to keep in mind that in the 21st century, some skills that are very important are very hard to measure. Think about problem-solving skills. Think about creativity. Think about social and emotional skills. We know they're very important, but they're very hard to measure, very expensive to measure. So there is a choice to be made. How many grades are you going to assess, and what depths do you engage with? And it's important to make the right choice. Also, some of the things we can predict. We can design our assessments and evaluations to find out answers to questions that we ask ourselves. And many people say good research always starts with a good research or policy question. Yeah, true to some extent, but you also need to be ready for the unexpected, the unanticipated. The COVID has shown us the future will always surprise us. And I think we need to create space in assessment for the unexpected, for the unanticipated, that helps us see questions that we haven't seen before. And you can make that list longer. Some people say, if you want to measure change, you cannot change the measure. I think it's a very sad look at the world. It means that we freeze our metrics and sort of conserve education in what it is today. We need to find the right balance between, yes, measuring change, measuring an improvement, but also adapting the measures to the change in our times. I highlighted the example of literacy. The literacy of the year 2000 is a very different literacy from the year 2021. We need to factor that into our work. Difficult decisions. Statisticians don't like it. Statisticians say, no, you need to measure change, you need to keep the measures reliable. But relevance is about finding a good balance. For our work, that's not so much for you in Brazil, but how do you square comparability with relevance? If you compare, the Sao Paulo with the Amazon region, is it appropriate? Is it fair to use the same metric? How do you can ensure that both states can learn from each other and still feel that they're adequately represented in the measurement? And you can imagine for us at the OECD, that's a major headache. But I think we need to ask those questions. How do we find those right balances? How do we ensure that what we test is informed by what students learn, but not constrained by it? That's, again, one of the sad parts of assessment, that often it holds student learning back. It doesn't advance it by focusing on the common denominator of what's taught in every classroom. We don't learn, the most interesting thing in life don't happen at the center of your sight. They happen at the periphery of your vision. They happen outside of what you can see. And that's something that we need to become more aware of. I want to show you an example from an early PISA study, and I think it's quite instructive. You look at mathematics, and of course, there's a score for mathematics, but under the score, there are different tasks. And you can now map the task by their difficulty, and then you can see to what extent is memorization, something very dominant in the Brazilian school system, helping you. And the question is very different the answer is very different for different PISA tasks. For the easy problems, memorization can help you. But for the more complex tasks, memorization actually hinders learning. That's very important to keep in mind that actually, memorization can be a useful tool in schooling, but it can also be part of the problem. Assessment can actually tell us this. If assessments become more granular, more responsive to a different kind of task set, we can see those differences. You ask myself, how do you get the more difficult problems right on the PISA set? Actually, it's to do with elaboration strategies, where students are capable to connect the known with the unknown, the familiar with the unfamiliar, the different contexts. There, they become very, very good solvers of difficult mathematical problems. So once you can see through the surface of the score towards the type of tasks and the kind of cognitive strategies that help you learn those tasks, you can transform assessment into pedagogy. But we often miss that step. Our assessments stop with the score. You get 500 points for mathematics or 200 points. We're never looking deep enough into the assessment to help us understand what makes learners succeed and what makes them, struggle. That's just as an example. But I want to continue with my list of choices and trade-offs. You need to always, struggle. Do you measure lots of things at very shallow depths to get a broad measure of student outcomes? Or do you try to strengthen the depths of the measures and then you lose in breadth? And that's something that, we have answered for PISA, but you need to answer for every assessment. It's not easy. Some people will push you, try to measure as much as you can. Other people tell you, no, try to measure something as deeply as you can to get a real good understanding of what students know and can do. We have found our own answer in PISA, but I think that's something that you just need to consider. I just want to sort of move on. That's all about the design of assessment, but the difficult part usually starts with how do you interpret those kinds of outcomes. And comparability is an important dimension. Now, finding meaningful units of comparisons. You look at the school, you look at the district, you look at the state, you look at the country. Now, what are the right comparators that help improving the system? If you get too far above the radar screen, people lose sight of where they are themselves. The schools will say, well, I'm not Brazil, I'm a school in a state of so-and-so. If you get too close to the school, you lose the comparative value. Difficult issues to see. And then, communication. Always, I don't think, any assessment system. I know the INEP in Brazil is a great example where communication has been an important part. I still think you do not do it nearly enough to make sure that those results are really understood and what they mean for people. I think it's a universal problem. And that brings me to the next point. What are the policy uses of this data? I want to start with something, my own country. Before PISA, I come from Germany. Before PISA was there, most people thought we have a really good education system. Our outcomes are good. We spend a lot of education. We spend the same for every student. So our education system is very equitable. Then they got the results, and they were very different from their own expectations. The first reaction was there must be something wrong with PISA. No, but then the second reaction was maybe we should look to other countries. That's something is basically what international assessments can do. It can, and I think the same at the national level, they can give you kind of a broader look, an outside look, you know? Helping policymakers and educators to look outwards. In 2012, when Britain did not do so well in mathematics, the British Minister of Education went to Shanghai in China to look at some of the schools there and was very impressed how they teach mathematics. And then she brought, you know, a lot of those people into Britain to help, you know, British teachers learn from different ways of teaching mathematics. And actually, it's transformed pedagogy. Many teachers went to those courses. It became one of the most interesting exercises because suddenly you study a new world, a different culture, different way of teaching mathematics. And actually, now, many years after, the results are becoming much better. I think Brazil has done a great example. I think the INEP in placing national standards into a broader perspective. You were the very first country that has connected the national assessment with PISA. And I think this is something that many countries are now doing as well, but they learn from you how to do this, to bring the big picture back to the individual school. PISA has exposed grade inflation. You know, one of the things that we often see in national assessments that people become better and better. Schools improve and improve without real improvement. You know, when you then do the PISA test 3 years later, you get the same results. That's something very, very important. It's a very toxic feature of assessments that they lead to grade inflation. People try to become better on the results of the assessment without becoming better at the constructs that underlie this assessment. And so on. And you can lower the political cost of action. In the year 2003, Japan wanted to do a major curriculum reform, and they used the PISA as a context for this. And I mentioned the example of my own country. You know, you do nothing and you pay a very high price for this as well. That's something that I think is very important as well. And, you know, keep in mind, you know, people associate results with money. But, you know, in Brazil, I wouldn't say, you know, it's a country that spends a lot or very little. Actually, the results for Brazil are very much in line with the investment that the system makes in the wealth of the country. Spending choices. How do you spend money? Compare the United States and China. Both countries are quite similar in the student-staff ratio, in the number of teachers they employ for every 100 students. But China has very large classes, and the United States has very small classes. So what is better? Well, most people would say United States, smaller classes, easier for teachers and more liked by parents, so let's go for small classes. But then, you know, you cannot pay your teachers very well. You cannot give your teachers very much time for other things than teaching, and teaching becomes kind of the last resort for people. In the Chinese case, you know, yeah, they have large classes, but that gives them a lot of money to actually, you know, give teachers time for other things than teaching. So teachers become researchers, designers, improve the education system. They have to deal with large classes. And where you can see Brazil, somewhere in the middle. Now, that's something I think to think about. We can look at assessment as a tool to assess productivity. Here you can see the range of learning outcomes across countries. Now you can see, for example, the United Arab Emirates is the country where, you know, investing almost 60 hours per week into student learning. A lot of it out of school, here marked in yellow. Finland, on the other hand, has spent little more than half of that time. Huge differences in the volume of learning time, and people talk about this a lot. But when you look at productivity, that's what you get when you have, you know, good assessments on the future. You can see in Finland, students learn a lot in very little time, whereas in the United Arab Emirates, they learn very little in a lot of time. And the question for Brazil also is not so much learning time. It's really about improving productivity. But I want to add another dimension. You know, this is all about reading math and science, things that we know how to assess and so on. I want to bring you to another topic that we pay increasing attention to in our work, and that is the kind of social and emotional outcomes of education. Growth mindset, for example. In the last assessment, we measured something that we call the growth mindset of students. To what extent do students own their learning? To what extent do they feel that sense of agency, that sense of empowerment that they can grow beyond their limits? And you can see in a country like Estonia, students do very well on the PISA test, that's the vertical axis, and they have that growth mindset. In a country like Indonesia, you can see students don't do particularly well academically, and they also lack that growth mindset. They all think, learning is all about inherited intelligence. Brazil is a little bit of an outlier on this, but basically it follows that pattern. We need to pay more attention to the mindsets that underpin learning outcomes and to find ways to observe, to quantify them, because they become very powerful levers for actual change. And they're also important in their own right. It's not just about better academic outcomes. You can see where students had more of a growth mindset, they were more motivated to master difficult tasks. They had a greater sense of self-efficacy. They were less afraid of failure. And if you want Brazilian students to be creative, imaginative, you have to give them space to experiment, to try things out. If they experiment things, they take risks. If they take risks, they'll make mistakes. If an education system is not very good to help students learn from and with mistakes, probably students do not become so creative. So you can see actually how that growth mindset is an important predictor of those outcomes. Students with a growth mindset were more motivated to go for ambitious learning goals. And they saw greater value in school. So you can see really we need to, in our future of assessment, pay more attention to those dimensions that actually are important influences, shapers of outcomes. The biggest challenge for schooling is not just productivity, it's relevance. Do our schools really stay relevant to the questions of our times? We know how to educate second-class robots, people who are very good to repeat what you told them. But what makes us human in a world of artificial intelligence? I hope that the future of assessment will get us closer to this question. But assessment plays one more important function, and that is, telling us something about the distribution of outcomes. Without assessment, we believe, education is the same for everyone. With assessment, we can actually drill down and see how education plays out for students from different social backgrounds. I'll take an average country here from the middle, the Slovak Republic. And you can see here the performance gap between students from the poorest and the wealthiest families. We say the 9th and the 10th deciles, the 9th and the 1st deciles, is almost the world. The 10% most disadvantaged students do as badly as the Philippines, the 10% wealthiest, they do as well as Finland and Canada. So you have a small country in Europe and you can see the world. And I could have put, Sao Paulo or, Brasilia or Rio de Janeiro into this picture. You'd see the same picture. You find a world in a state in Brazil, maybe even in a district. Some people say that's inevitable. Students from wealthier background have better opportunities, more supportive parents, more resources, more early learning, lots of reasons for this picture. But then you see some countries that have changed it. I want to highlight Portugal. Portugal looked very similar to the Slovak Republic in the early years of PISA. And the reason why you saw it improving very much is because it improved the performance of its most disadvantaged students. Today, the most disadvantaged students in Portugal do as well as the average student in the Slovak Republic. And if you take the 10% most disadvantaged students from the 4 Chinese regions in PISA, they are doing as well as the 10% wealthiest students in the Slovak Republic. Poverty need not be destiny. An assessment can tell us to what extent actually we are breaking the link. And I want to bring Brazil into this picture as well. Here you can see on our work, on the vertical axis, the performance of schools, and on the horizontal axis, the social background of schools. And every dot is one school. The bigger circles are the bigger dots, the smaller ones are the smaller schools. And I've marked the private schools in blue and the public schools in gray. So you can see very nicely wealthy parents in Brazil buy themselves out of the public school system. They're all on the right side. But actually, interestingly, the predicted performance is not so different. Actually, much of the performance advantage of private schools comes through the social background from the parents. When you net that out, it's actually not much left. So parents pay often a lot of money for not actually much superior value. And that's something that assessment and evaluation can tell you in a very honest way. You know, there's a lot of belief about quality. You can certainly look into this in more detail. But you can also see there are exceptions. Here you have a public school from a or average wealthy family background doing quite well, and you have a school from the same social context doing quite poorly. So once again, poverty need not be destiny. But many people who see that picture, when I showed it first in Brazil, they said, well, that's what we told you. It's all about social background. You have to make poor families wealthy first, and then education will improve. Well, actually, if you compare Brazil with Vietnam, keep that picture in mind, you see in Vietnam, suddenly all the dots are higher. Vietnam is actually more to the left than Brazil. It's a poorer country than Brazil, has more disadvantaged families, but it's doing better than Brazil. All of the schools suddenly have lifted up, and that again is a good illustration that poverty need not be destiny, that we can do things about this. And that brings me to the very last slide, can we make the closest school the best school? And many policymakers, worry about the choice of schools. How do you actually allocate students and teachers to schools? These are very, very important questions in countries like Brazil, where there is quite a lot of variation in performance between schools. But you see other countries like Finland, where that variation no longer exists. They have made the closest school always the best school. They have basically tackled inequality at the source, and therefore, helped schools to advance. So it's again an important perspective. Many of the problems that we have in a school system, obliging parents to find out what is a good school and so on, result from the kind of policy context that we are not good in aligning resources. And you can see that very clearly here that in the case of Brazil, if you come from a disadvantaged neighborhood, you're going to find your school with less qualified teachers and also with poorer resources and so on. So that is the origin for the variation between schools. But as you can see on the right side, we can address it. And assessment and evaluation can tell us about this. Without this, we're flying blind. Very last point I make, is about, one very big controversy in countries like Brazil, but also elsewhere. Many people say social segregation in the country is all about, public and private schools. Basically, they are splitting society, they are splitting the school population, and therefore, that's the origin of social disparity in society and certainly in the school system. And what you see in this chart is, it's a little part of the story. It's a light blue bar, but not the big part of the story. Actually, if we're honest, in a country like Brazil, most of the social segregation comes from within the public school system. We're not intending to do this, certainly not. But the school system is not fair. The school system penalizes students from disadvantaged backgrounds and privileges those from privileged backgrounds. And Brazil is not alone. You can see that in many countries around the world. That is one of the fundamental issues. So don't put the blame for social segregation all on private schools. Actually, the biggest contributor to social segregation is the kind of public school system. That's where public policy can and need to work on. And with that, I will conclude so that I give you a few moments for questions if you have.
Andreas, primeiro, muito obrigada por sua fala. Eu sei do esforço.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for this talk. And I know you're extremely busy, and we appreciate the time you're spending here with us. I would also like to thank Mr. Reinaldo Fernandez, coordinating Comparability, Mr. Ricardo, our academic coordinator, Lina Katia, our VP, and Mr. Mauro Rabello, who is here representing the Department of Education and Basic Education. Thank you, Professor Schleicher. This was a really interesting, really relevant talk because I think it is worth it not to have such a wide range of evaluations, but to have more in-depth evaluations and assessments. So fewer metrics and better depth. I think this is paramount for the future of the SAEB system and the ANEM system. Also, social segregation and inequality in Brazil are embedded into the public system, which is highly unequal. I think these are two very important points. Before I hand it back to you, let me ask Mauro a question. Mauro is representing the Department of Education in Brazil. Mauro, do you have a question? Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Schleicher. Professor, I know this is not a simple question, the one that I'm about to ask. But given the information you just shared with us, if you were to draft an idea today to replace IDEB in Brazil, what would you take into account for our indicators? You probably know IDEB in Brazil, right? You're probably familiar with it, so I will not go into details. So if you were to draft any changes for IDEB in Brazil, what would you keep in mind for these indicators, since we are now going through this kind of assessment here?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a great supporter and a great fan of IDEB. I actually think it's one of the world's most reliable ways of looking at out of end of school kind of outcomes. So I would always be careful when changing a system that has been very successful. But I do think there are some areas to consider. The first is, in every assessment, I would look at one area that leads the education system forward. I think it's good to measure things that are very established, but I think I would look always at one area where, it gives teachers to think about. It challenges the education system. It looks at the education system through an outside lens. I give you an example. Brazilian students tend to be quite good on the reproduction of subject matter content. They tend to struggle when they have to use and apply content in creative ways. And somehow the current assessment avoids that question by not asking it. I would not avoid that question. I would basically say, look, maybe you haven't taught it, but still have a look at this. So every assessment, I would, pose one of those challenging questions to the education system itself. The second part is, I would collect really good contextual data to understand, what do those results mean? When you see big variation in school performance, and I think the strength of your system is that it provides individual school results, you need to ask yourself, how do we ensure that we compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges? And the only way to achieve this is to have good contextual data that help, teachers see themselves in this picture. We call them statistical neighbors. If you compare me with the average school in Brazil, I would say, well, that's not a fair comparison. Maybe wealthy or less wealthy or better prepared or less well prepared. If you compare me with someone who looks very similar to me, it's much more difficult for me to dismiss those results. So I think, collecting good contextual data would be the second innovation. But, keep in mind, I would be very cautious about changing a system that is actually one of the world's most robust and reliable ways of measuring school progress.
Obrigada, Andreas.
Thank you, Andreas. What about changing SAEB? What would you change about the basic education assessment system? Because with IDEB, you have the basic education assessment system and indexes. And Reynaldo, who invented IDEB, is here. Do we have a question from Reynaldo, by the way? No, I don't actually have a question, but I would like to thank Andreas. Andreas, it's always a pleasure. I always enjoy your talks, and I always enjoy hearing about this data. Could we get access to the slide deck? It's always a pleasure. Thank you, sir. Great. Lina, Brimi, do you have any questions? Well, I would like to thank Professor Andreas for being here. Thank you for being with the Brazilian Association for Educational Assessment again. You shared very important data regarding PISA. Let me ask you a question. You were talking about the assessment of creativity and the ability to apply content and apply learning in different ways. Would you use multiple choice items or open-ended questions?
Well, if you want to assess creativity, you want to assess whether students can produce answers you have not thought about. So a multiple choice format will not work for you in this case. I think creativity is about challenging, questioning the established wisdom of our times, not reproducing it. So when you look at the PISA assessment of creativity, you will not find multiple choice questions. You will find computer simulation tasks. Students have to produce their own answers. They have to assess the originality of their own responses. And I think that is very important. Sometimes, we in assessment, and I think it's true for Brazil as well, we trade in relevance for reliability. We want to make our assessments very reliable, so we use a lot of multiple choice tasks, and then we lose relevance without even seeing it. And we also trade in efficiency or for validity. We want to make our assessments cheap and very, very cost effective, very simple to administer. And suddenly we lose sight of, are they really measuring what they were intended to measure? So I think that again, my answer here is measure fewer things, but measuring in a way that you can actually see what you were looking for. Otherwise, you will see things that are just a byproduct of other skills. And so multiple choice questions, I think, will not really help you to assess the core of creative thinking.
Perfeito.
Andreas, eu queria primeiro agradecer também.
That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this presentation as well, because this data was really interesting. Very good points of reflection. Now, let me pick your brain on something regarding the growth mindset. We see that Brazil is an outlier when it comes to the growth mindset. And compared to China, we see the opposite. They are an outlier to the other side. They have very good performance, but low growth mindset. Do you have any idea why? Because I think this diagonal line we saw is really interesting. And with international comparisons, we can understand more about ourselves.
Look at it first in a positive way. You have students in Brazil, they struggle with mathematics and science, but society or the education system has convinced them that actually they can change their future. That their entrepreneurial activity will be valued. Trying hard, something will come out for them. It may not have worked in school, but it will work in life for them. I really believe that the growth mindset goes well beyond the school. So I think Brazil should be happy that it is strong on the growth mindset, even if it struggles on the quality of education. For the Chinese, I would say the opposite. I would say, look, you have done very well academically, but you have put your schools, your students in such a rigid kind of framework that they do not see themselves as owners of their learning. And when they get out of school, are they going to continue learning if they do not believe that they can change the environment? So I think, there I would actually focus more on creating more space for students to build more learner agency, to develop a stronger growth mindset. So, maybe both countries can come closer to the diagonal.
Obrigada, Andreas. Tem uma pergunta.
Thank you, Andreas. We have another question here from our audience. How can we strike balance when it comes to resources for schools that need more resources to boost equality and equity in learning?
Sorry, I did not get the translation well. Can you repeat the question?
The question is how to invest more money, mais recursos em escolas.
Here's the question. How can we invest more money in schools that need it the most, more vulnerable schools, to ensure quality?
Now I understand it. Actually, there are many ways how you can do that. First, you can do it financially. You can use, many countries now use formula-based funding approaches, where the money which a school gets is proportional to the socioeconomic challenges which it faces. So if you are in a rural area or in a disadvantaged area as a school, you will get more money. Sweden has a system like this. Germany is introducing a system like this. I think that financially you can do this. But I want to caution you. The United Kingdom has a pupil premium, but I want to caution you. Getting more money to disadvantaged schools is not necessarily the best way to make them better. Money is only a starting point. I think what matters more is how do you attract your most talented teachers to teach in the most disadvantaged schools? And I've learned a lot from China, actually, in this field. They build every career path of teachers through disadvantage. If you are a very successful teacher in a high-performing school in a wealthy area, and you want to move up in your career, the education system will tell you it's a great aspiration, but first, help us teaching in one of the most disadvantaged schools. If you are a vice principal in a high-performing school and you want to become the principal, the education system will tell you it's a great aspiration, but first, help us change one of the most disadvantaged schools. And they can actually systematically pair high and low performing schools. I know that in Brazil, the state of Ceará has done something like this in the early 2000s, and also with quite success. Now, if you can actually match the experience of a high-performing school with the lack of experience of a low-performing school, you will get better outcomes than just giving a low-performing school more money. It's a very dangerous route to reward underperformance. I think the question is not so much money. It's always about expertise. And I think if your system creates better incentives for really good teachers to take on very difficult schools, and that may have to do with money, you need to maybe pay them more, or you need to take care of the families or whatever. But that is, I think, the right investment that will ultimately change that school. So again, financial means get you only so far. The big question is always about human talent, human capacity. But they're very good examples. What they've done in China, they've done in Vietnam as well. So there are a number of countries that have used sort of incentives to attract great talent to disadvantage.
Muito obrigada, Andreas. Nós
Great. Thank you very much, Professor. We truly appreciate your time and your attention. It's always an honor for us to have you here as a speaker during our Brazilian panels. And we're really happy to know that you are following up closely on the changes that we have in Brazil. You understand our reality. You always bring us good suggestions and good ideas. It's a pleasure to hear you, especially because right now our country is struggling a bit more. The pandemic has been tough on us, and we've been with our schools closed for over 200 days. And going back to school after this time is really challenging. Many schools will go back to in-person activities in September of 2021, so this month. That is why we know that we'll be struggling for a bit, but we are sure we'll be able to overcome these challenges. Andreas, do you have any final remarks? Thank you.
No, I just want to say, it is so important to reopen the schools. And I must actually say, many countries, even when the pandemic was really difficult, they kept the schools open, at least the primary schools, because, it's not just about learning loss. School is such an important place as a social environment for many young people. I think now you need to redouble your efforts to help those students to succeed and give them the support. But I also feel that, assessment and evaluation is more important than ever. If you do not see what students have lost through good and do not give teachers good information, they will fall even further behind. So I really hope that, Brazil will be quick to respond to this and help struggling students to succeed. But, overall, I've always seen Brazil on a very promising track. You're really one of the leaders in the field of evaluation and assessment, not just in Latin America, but in the world. And it's been a pleasure to work with you for many years in this field. Obrigado.
Muito obrigada. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andreas.
We are very grateful. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. All right, everyone. So Andreas was with us for another 15 minutes, so he pushed his other meeting another 15 minutes. That was very kind of him. So we changed the order of our agenda here so that we could listen to what Andrea had to say. Now we're going to be thanking all of our sponsors. We have a list here. I really noted them down so that I don't leave anyone out. All of our sponsors are extremely important. We had the Lemon Foundation, Cesar Rio Foundation, CAED, Vanzolini Foundation, Itaú Educação and Trabalho, Education and Work, the Unibanco Institute. I can't find my list now. I just mentioned I had one. I can't find it. Oh, I found it. Roberto Marinho Foundation, FUNESP, and Casa Grande Institute. We had a number of sponsors that was very important. Without that, we wouldn't have been able to hold this event. So thank you very much to our sponsors, without whom we wouldn't be staging this online event. With that, we have a number of agreements and contracts that need to be drawn. So I just like to once again wholeheartedly thank all of our supporters and sponsors. I like to thank the organizing committee. We had Sylvia and Thais, Leandro, all the Vanzolini people. They were very devoted. I like to thank Lina Katia, the VP of ABAVI, Ricardo Plimio, the academic director, and the whole board, Neumann, Fontanivia, all of the scientific board of ABAV that really helped us organize all of these panels and have guests from all over the world join us in our sessions. We're going to have other sessions about primary education, child education, higher education, SAEB, NM, the high school exam, about education indicators, other panels with speakers from all over Brazil and from all over the world. And all of that was possible thanks to the ABAV board, the organizing committee, and the scientific committee of ABAV as well. So I'd now like to turn the floor over to, or rather, we'll first show a video. We'll be listening to the president of INEP. He wasn't able to join us live, but then I'm going to turn the floor over to Mauro, who is here representing the Ministry of Education, and also Amabile, the Vice President of ABAVE, who is here representing the National Council of Education. So I would now like to have the video, please. with the president of INEP.
Cumprimento a professora Maria Helena Guimarães de Castro.
Greetings to Professor Maria Helena Guimarães de Castro and all of the members and all of those joining this this meeting, and all of those members of ABAV and the 11th conference of the item response theory. It's great to be here talking about education in the setting of inequality. So congratulations to ABAV for tabling this subject. I know that you keep a close eye on national and international assessments that are under the responsibility of INEP. We are involved in many projects for the coming months involving ENEM, the high school exam, as well as SAEB, the basic education assessment test. And we're also preparing for new international assessments, and I'll be talking about higher education today. I want to show you recent data of a success case that we had in our management. And I'm very proud to say that INEP has had over 2,000 assessments in undergraduate courses in higher education institutions. On the 26th of April, when we implemented the new model, up to September, we had thousands of assessments that were carried out. And in 2018 and 19, prior to the pandemic, the total number of visits was around 5,000 visits a year. And INEP is now able to have at least 500 visits a month. And this figure is going to rise with our learning curve. As of October, we will be able to have 400 visits a week, 1,600 a month. These new figures are the result of the reorganization of our processes with online live processes. The pandemic called for new solutions so that we continue to fulfill our mission, but the virtual remote model is a natural development of the higher education assessment in line with our time and era. We haven't changed our methodology in technical parameters. What we did was use technology to our favor. Only the medicine and odontology, nursing, and psychology courses continue to have in-person, on-site assessments. We have a number of advantages. One of them is that we can do activities faster at a lower cost. We want virtual assessment to be expanded into other areas as well. Hello, everyone. Apparently, there was a technical problem. We missed the ending of the video. I asked the support staff, do we have any issues with the video?
A gente está checando aqui.
One second, Maria Helena, we're trying to figure out what happened. We were very close to the ending of the video. External assessment on site is an example, and with this new approach, we're going to be quicker, at lower costs, and being connected with society on new levels. Governance and innovation is a heritage that we want to consolidate in our management, in our administration. So thank you very much for this event, for this debate. I wish you all a very successful event.
Bem, nós agradecemos a fala do presidente do INEP.
Thank you very much to the president of INEP. Thank you for recording this video. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us live today. And I'd like to turn the floor over to Secretary Mauro Rebelo, who is now spearheading the work group of SAEB and INIM. Please, Mauro, the floor is yours. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here. It is an honor to be on this panel. Hello, Reynaldo. Hello, Amabile. Hello, Lina. It's great to be here with you all. Miss working with you, right? We haven't worked together for a while now. And it's always great to listen to Andre speak. He's able to cast light on many points, and there's much that we can learn from what he's presented. I'm very happy to be here at the 11th ABAVI conference. Brazil is going through a rough patch, right, when it comes to education, as the whole of the world is. We had an in-person meeting last Thursday with the Board of Education to talk about the challenges we have. There was one specific debate about the assessments focusing mainly on INEM, the high school exam, and I believe that never before have we spoken so much about assessment in learning in Brazil, not as much as we've been doing it in the past year. And I like to talk about my department, the mathematics department at the University of Brasilia. We first started having the remote classes, and the question that came up in the professors meeting, and we're almost 70 professors, right? So the question that came up was, how about assessment? How are we going to assess learning? There were suggestions even that we should have a camera showing that students were really the ones doing the test. So I believe that education has really improved by leaps and bounds, and there's still a lot to be learned still. We still need to gauge the level of impact that the pandemic has had on learning, but it has impacted a number of other things. School management, how professors and teachers work. So I believe there are a number of variables that we need to take into account beyond, of course, the most relevant and important one, which is what the impact was on learning concerning our students. And I think one of the best decisions that the Ministry of Education made this year was to keep SAEB, which is the Basic Education Assessment Test. SAEB is a very powerful tool. We all on this panel know this tool, and I believe that most of our spectators know this tool too. And we have a baseline of 2019, and we shouldn't really miss the chance to have the assessment in 2021 so that we have a reference of learning levels, how students are going to be moving about on the learning scale. So I believe the greatest challenge here is to have the results of this assessment as fast as possible. so that we know what the proficiency is as soon as possible. We are running some diagnostic assessments. I spent the day in the state of Paraná yesterday, and I had the chance also to visit Roraima, looking at schools at the border of the country and indigenous schools. I also went to Natal at the Undime event, the National Municipal Education Managers Union event, and I think that this is very important. Considering my role nowadays, I think that I need to look at different experiences all over the country, because these experiences will inspire us so that we can really support states and municipalities and devise new policies with them. We have new policies and actions being outlined. We are working hard on a strategy for the North and Northeast of Brazil. And we had this meeting in Roraima with all of the secretaries of education for the North and the Northeast.
Now, Maria Helena was mentioning the Brazilian Common Core and our new high school system. She also mentioned the 30 years of this assessment. And because of all of these events, we got together to rediscuss the two biggest assessments we have in Brazil, meaning SAEB and ENEM. And what Andrea said is really, really good as food for thought. In our working group, we have been discussing a number of ideas he mentioned, and we haven't reached a framework yet. However, meeting after meeting, I believe that our group is able to start making choices. Amabile is in this group, Maria Helena is in this group, and Reinaldo, by the way, we decided that at a certain point, we'll have to stop talking about SAEB and start talking about IDEB. Lina is also helping us. On the 7th of October, we'll be launching a proficiency test for students, and then we'll have a formative assessment in 4 waves, and we'll be able to follow the progress of our students from the 6th to the 9th grades. This is a part of Brazil in School program, and we'll be able to expand it to other districts interested in being a part of it for math, science, and Portuguese. As already said, we have TIMS and PEARLS as well. We've expanded TIMS to the 8th grade. Previously, our contract was valid only for the 5th grade or up to the 5th grade. Now, as Andreas was saying, and he used an example with his country, Germany, Germany used to think that their education was spotless, perfect in a way, even though that's not the word that he used. But then they attended an international assessment meeting, and they thought the assessment was the problem. And after that, they decided to really look into their system and review it. And we've seen long-term or long-time data from the PISA program, and we know that we have a long way ahead of us. The good news is that we have good references and benchmarks. Let me give you some insight on our decisions at the working group. One of the points of consensus that we have with this SAEB assessment is related to English. And I think this will be important. We need to include English in this assessment because this will help our country evolve. And some of the advice we had ruled out is now being revisited. I think we can make even more progress than anticipated. I don't want to give you any spoilers because we haven't reached official decision making. But, I don't know. I'm here today because of these assessments. Things started happening, and if you know me, you know that I'm in love with this topic. I truly see this as my mission in the Department of Education, and we'd love to deliver this by the end of this year. We want a North Star for these important assessments in Brazil, SEAB and INEM. And these are big challenges. I'm not going to say which one is the biggest challenge because they are different. They have different goals. We've worked through these goals. We've understood the different roles they play, but we have to tackle them both. So this is what I would like to share with you today, and I will be happy to take any questions. Thank you. Thank you, Mauro. This is really interesting. You mentioned proficiency assessments, formative assessments. This is all very interesting, but I still think the most interesting thing here are the guidelines for SAEB and INEM. Our council is working with the Department of Education and with our working group. And I do believe we have important work ahead of us to support and boost this movement. Now, let me hand it over to Lina, the VP of ABAVI. Hello, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to congratulate you, Maria Helena. Congratulations for holding such an important meeting, such an important conference. Mauro, it is great to hear about this movement and about changes in regulations by the Department of Education when it comes to SAEB and the IDEB index. You're looking for something more consistent, and you're looking for an important road towards growth. As Andreas was saying, he has some points of concern, and so do I. But I think these are important indicators. And I think we need this message in school that kids have to learn and kids have to be in school. This is our take-home message with IDEB, and this is something that I believe Andreas shared really clearly. Hello, dear Reynaldo. It's always a pleasure to see you during our meetings, either with ABAVI or during Comparability. You're always looking for better options. You're always looking for indicators. You're always doing research. And we know you want to help us in public education. Same thing applies to PRIMI. In academia, with contextual questionnaires or surveys, you've been fostering the same initiative. I would also like to thank and greet our members and our researchers at ABAVI. You're always here with us for our events, and you're always advocating for the importance of ABAVI in the public school districts and networks. I would like to say hi to everyone who is here and wish you a great conference. I think we'll get to learn a lot. We are in a group of educators who believe that a number of factors will play a role into teaching. Even before the pandemic, inequality has always been a point of concern for this group. With inequality, of course, we need to take into account social factors, economic factors, schooling for parents, infrastructure, and their impact on the student journey. We should also be taking into account the atmosphere at the school, the kind of management they have, if they grade homework, teaching practices, etc., etc., because these internal factors will minimize the impact of external factors. We've always discussed these at Abavi, and now we do more than ever, because we need to fight inequality within our network. But now we have to worry about inequality in the classroom, not only between schools. And of course, within a classroom, we will always have diversity, we will always have inequality. We'll find fifth grade students who are actually supposed to be in second grade according to their learning. According to the research we see by CAED, we have learning gaps of up to 2 years of actual gaps. This is a big point of concern for us. And as Mauro was saying, assessments are critically relevant in this sense. Because when we have assessments, we are testing for the fundamental right to learning. And it's about quality and equity. The right to learn has to do with offering high-quality education to everyone. Abavi has always taken care of this, and this is fully related to inequality. That is why assessments are extremely important. We could have formative assessments, we could have the SAEB assessment, we could have a set of assessments to come up with a diagnosis to talk about an uncertain future. This is a starting point for school management based on our syllabus and our Brazilian Common Core. I am sure these will be discussed during this conference by our brilliant speakers. So I do hope you enjoyed this event, and I do hope we learn a lot and we exchange a lot of ideas to boost the quality of public education in Brazil. Thank you and enjoy the event. Thank you so much, Lina. We are still going to hear from Reynaldo from Comparability, from Amabile, representing the National Council, and Primi, our educational director. Reynaldo, go ahead. Hi, good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to greet my fellow panelists. Hello, Maria Elena. Hello, Lina. Hello, Primi. Hello, Amabile. And hello, Mauro. Long time no see. Thank you for sharing this panel with me. And I would like to welcome everyone who is attending the Abavi conference today and who attended Comparability yesterday. I would also like to mention our first speaker, Andreas, with his excellent presentation. And I knew he could stay with us until 11 a.m. Brazilian time, and I was feeling a bit nervous when I saw we were running over that time. But everything worked out fine, and his presentation was great. So I would like to thank everyone who was here yesterday for Comparability and who is here today for the Abavi conference. The 7th Comparability was supposed to take place last year in August. Now, because of the pandemic, we decided to postpone it for maybe December, January, because we were feeling optimistic at the time, but we had to cancel it. That is why we decided to hold Comparability with the Abavi conference this year fully online. Next year, we should have Comparability again, and Comparability and the Abavi conference will be held in turns bi-yearly. But Maria Elena, some people have been telling me that holding both of these events during the same year is interesting as well. It has some pros.
Comparability ran really well yesterday. I haven't yet watched all of the panels and the presentations, of course, because they take place at the same time. But the comments I have heard from my friends and colleagues were very positive. So I am very happy with the results, and I am also positive that Abavi's conference is going to be equally successful. I like to thank some people in specific, Ricardo and Leandro. They helped me coordinate and organize the panels, and evidently Thaisa and Sylvia. Without you, we wouldn't be as successful as we are. Thank you. So I'd like to thank all of those that have supported us and helped us. And I hope that you all enjoy these sessions we're going to have today and tomorrow, that these sessions are fruitful and interesting. And this is our 11th Abavi conference, right? The 11th Abavi meeting. So thank you, welcome, and let's all have a fantastic conference together. Thank you, Maria Elena. Thank you very much, Reynaldo. I'd now like to hand it over to Primi, or should I hand it over to Amabile, who would like to speak? You can't imagine how much I'm looking forward to in-person meetings. Hey, I'm here. Sorry, I hadn't seen you. Hello, Amabile. Please, Amabile, the floor is yours.
Primi tá aí. Quer falar primeiro, Primi? Não tem problema.
Primi, would you like to speak first? No, go ahead, Amabile. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you, Lina. Thank you very much, Maria Elena, for this opportunity to join you on this panel side by side with people whom I have admired for so long. And we have Ricardo, Primi, Reynaldo, Fernandez, yourself, Mauro, Rabelo. So it is really a privilege to me to be here with you. We heard Andrea speak about Brazil. Sometimes we despair a bit, but you know, his talk actually gave me some hope. I have to concede it. I'd like to point out a few points he made, that students need to have, for example, a space where they can feel comfortable to take risk and make mistakes. And I like to just mention a few points here around the segregation in the public school system being greater than that between private and public schools. The private school setting today is very different to what we believed it is. We have 9 million students in 41,000 private schools, and we have 6 million students in higher education institutes. The schools that grow the most in the past years are the ones that have grown the most are the so-called classes C, D, and E. 70% of students are or belong to the C, D, and E social classes in Brazil. So we need to factor that into our analyses. The charts that Andreas presented show that we have different results in private and public schools. And in the National Education Board, I have been talking about how much private schools are in need of help, especially the ones that work with the social classes C, D, and E. And when I looked at that chart that Andreas presented, we saw private and public schools And I wanted really just to put forward that 80% of students that we have in basic education and also in higher education belong to social classes C, D, and E. So I'd like just to mention that point. Thank you all again. Thank Maria Elena again for having me, and wish you all a fantastic event and a great day. Thank you, Amabile. Sorry, there was a bit of an echo there as I first spoke. I think it's sorted out. Thank you, Amabile. Thank you for sharing that data with us. Now I'd like to hand it over to Primi. I'm sorry, I am rushing a bit, but it's because we are nearing the end of our session. And Primi, are you there? Hello. Hello, Maria Elena. I'll be brief too. I'd first and foremost like to say how happy I am here to be here working with Maria Elena, Lina, Reynaldo. I'd like to thank the organizing committee as well, Thaisi, Sylvia. You're all extremely competent. And I'm here thinking back to when I was younger and a researcher at INEP, and I ran into Mauro and Reynaldo, and I was a researcher, a consultant, prayed by many questions, and all of the activities that Abave has been performing are fantastic. And I just wanted to say how happy I am to be working with all of the Abave members and Comparability and all of you. So I'd just like to say hello to all of the participants. We have about 500 people listening to us right now. We have 77 posters and talks being presented. You see how many people are interested in education, how people want to change the country when it comes to education, especially now with the pandemic that lends even more importance to education. And I just wanted really to praise and say how praiseworthy it is that all of us are interested in education and that we're all here together to talk and learn from each other so that we can really look at these data and understand our system and see how it can be improved. I just wanted to say how valuable this is. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Scientific Commission that helped us assess the papers and the posters. I'd like to thank the sponsors as well. And I'd just like to wish you all a great conference. I'm sure this event is going to be absolutely fantastic. And I'd like to say that you should try and use the resources available that we have. Spatial chat, and you can really get closer to the group and exchange experiences. So really try and find a moment to, of course, be present at all the sessions in the conference, but also to join these other discussions as well. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd really like to thank Mauro, who is here representing the Ministry of Education, Lina, Reynaldo, Comparability, Primi, our academic director. I'd like to thank the Scientific Commission at ABAV, Amabile representing the National Education Board. Dorinha was unfortunately not able to join us. I invited her too. The president of CONSED and Undini are going to be joining us in the afternoon sessions. They were unfortunately not able to join us in this morning session. But I'd like to say that ABAVE has really been contributing very much to help Brazilian education progress and help research and assessment progress, improving quality. I listened to Reinaldo Fernandez yesterday as he spoke about inequalities, and Primi speaking about vertical scale. And these were extremely important sessions. I learned so much by watching those sessions. And I really booked the full day in my schedule so that I'd be available for Comparability and Abavi yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And this afternoon, we're going to have a number of panels that are going to be extremely relevant, extremely important. At 2 p.m., we're going to have formative assessment, monitoring its implementation in the curriculum. And there is another simultaneous panel around the school efficacy and basic education assessment in Ibero-America. We'll have different researchers speaking to us. We'll have a panel about the new high school and the challenge in assessment. All of these panels are going to be extremely interesting. There's a panel about assessment and regulation in higher education. Well, I certainly haven't mentioned all of the sessions, but I would like to invite all of our members and all of those that signed up for the conference to join these sessions. And I'd like to thank the secretaries of education that allowed teachers and professors to join us in this event. And I'd like to thank CEMESP and all of the other associations. And I'd like to thank the Casa Grande Institute that helped us promote the event so much. Ondime, the National Municipal Education Managers Union, was also very much involved. I'd like to thank everyone for really being so engaged. And I'm sure that the discussions we're going to have this afternoon are going to talk about subjects that are absolutely pivotal in the education setting in Brazil. We know that Brazil has always had segregation and a big gap between the wealthy and the poor, but we know that the pandemic has worsened this problem. We know that many states are already carrying out assessments, and we know that we'll need to double down on our efforts with teachers and schools so that we can really keep students engaged and keep them committed to school so that we can really get them excited about moving on and carrying on. We know that this is absolutely crucial for Brazil and for Brazilian society. So thank you very much. I'd like to invite you all to join us at a couple of minutes before that. At 1:30, we'll be connected. And again, I'd like to invite Primi to the spatial chat. This is a very interesting mechanism, a very interesting tool for research and projects to be presented, for experiences to be exchanged. And Abavi's main contribution is allowing for experiences to be exchanged and having people from all over the world. We have people from the United States, from Chile, Colombia, from the Netherlands, from Germany. We have people from the four corners of the world joining us in our sessions, not to mention the specialists and managers from Brazilian education. So thank you to everyone. Welcome to all of you. And I'm sure these are going to be 2 fantastic days. And of course, there are other events coming up. There are events at the end of October and November. So thank you very much. And I'll be seeing you in a couple of hours. See you in the afternoon. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Tchau, tchau.
Boa tarde.
Tchau, tchau. Bom almoço.